Right, welcome back to the Budget Speech 2026. Minister Enoch Godongwana delivering the budget speech for this year. And I must say, unlike last year, when we had parties within the Government of National Unity arguing over the potential VAT hike, this seemed to be a more smooth one. A little bit of interruptions here and there, but my take on what we have seen in this budget is that it is one that sort of assisted in the satisfaction of many within the GNU, and of course a lot of it to one specific political party, the Freedom Front Plus, which has Peter Groenewald as the Minister of Correctional Services in terms of assistance on many correctional facilities. But joining me to unpack the budget speech as we take this conversation through to just before 3:30, I'd like to welcome Lisa Higginson. She's a researcher at the Budget Justice Coalition. She joins us via Zoom from Makanda. Lisa, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Faraz, and good afternoon to your visitors. Thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I think, Lisa, just your initial reaction to the speech that was delivered 10 minutes ago.
So we're still digesting the speech. We're a coalition, so our sort of views are shaped by the members of our coalition and by the communities that we engage. But I think our initial reaction is really that we are quite disappointed. In some of our earlier interviews, we had said that we had hoped that the minister would use some of the additional revenue to signal a real shift in the budget and allocate more funds towards health, education, social protection, and the other issues that are really affecting South Africans, especially the cost of living. So what we've seen is sort of more of the same. I know that lots of people are celebrating the stability that Treasury has been speaking about a lot, and we recognize the need for stability. We know that shocks affect poor and vulnerable households as well, but really we had hoped to see something a bit that reflects the real urgency of the issues that people are facing on the ground. So yeah, we're really quite disappointed, and we are continuing to look through the numbers to find the detail. It's sometimes from the speech itself, you miss some of those details of things that are allocated over the 3-year MTEF or things that are allocated this year.
Lisa, a lot of what the Budget Justice Coalition had been looking at was that of a gender-responsive budget. From the BJC's perspective, and I know there's a lot more that's going to be digested, but from what you have read, from what you have listened to, from what you have seen, were you convinced that this is a gender-responsive one?
Well, for us, it's very difficult for us to say at this point, because we had anticipated that there would be a new gender budget statement released with the budget. The first one came out last year, and the BJC had welcomed this as a positive step in gender-responsive budgeting. That's been taking a really long time to get off the ground. But, there were some quite serious issues with that. The number of departments that were part of the pilot was quite narrow. It was predominantly focused on economic participation with very little detail on health, education, social grants, and the care economy, which is something the BJC has been working on and looking at closely. But when we opened the documents today, we didn't find the gender budget statement for 2026. We see that it was mentioned in the budget review that this would be made available electronically. So we're hoping that this is just maybe a technical omission, and that gender budget statement will follow. But based on what we've seen from the speech, it doesn't look like the budget itself is responsive to the differentiated gender needs, and that's really what we're looking for. Even the earlier budget statements, they'd focused just on tagging which parts of the budget were specifically allocated to women. What we've been calling for is a much more sort of intentional approach of assessing the different needs, designing programs and allocating adequate funding. So yeah, at this point, we are not convinced that this is a gender responsive budget, but we may have to revisit once we've had a look at the gender budget statement, but we're not holding out much hope at this point.
Lisa, I want to touch on social grants because I know that's something that obviously the Budget Justice Coalition views quite closely. So 292.8 billion rand has been allocated in terms of that. Old age disability care dependency grants increases to 2,400, child support grant increases to 580, and the SRD grant will continue in its current form. Was this a tick in the eyes of the BJC in terms of social grants perspective?
Certainly not. No, what these increases really translate to about a 3.3% nominal increase. So it's basically just the official inflation rate. And what we know from the income and expenditure survey released from Stats SA is that households, particularly poorer households, are spending a large proportion of their income on housing, transport, electricity, and water, followed by food. Sorry, I've gone blank on the third. But the point being that that's particularly housing and electricity, we know that those costs are rising much faster than inflation, and I think the Commission report found that it was something in the region of about 28% increases. So those very small increases aren't going to make a lot of difference to those who depend on these grants. We've been calling for the child support grant in particular to be increased to the food poverty line. That's been increased now to 855 Rand. And so we see that really these increases fall far short of what's required.
Lisa, I want to go to education, and obviously it still remains the largest spending item, 23.7% of the budget. What we saw announced by Minister Godongwana was a major expansion in terms of early childhood development. National School Nutrition Program is maintained. I guess this is quite a topical discussion, especially when it comes to education. And I guess it's also the road to the education. So, for example, how many pupils get to schools in many of the rural areas. And you kind of feel as if government is still sort of missing a trick with regards to that. I mean, is that something that, you observed also with regards to education, or even just the way children actually get to the various educational institutions, I beg your pardon, especially within tertiary and primary school?
Sure, yes. And we would have sort of expected that with all the attention on scholar transport in the past few weeks, that there would be something a little bit more in the budget. I think, sometimes when we look at the numbers, they do look huge. It is a large proportion of the budget. But what our members have told us is that when you look in real terms, actually the per learner allocation hasn't really increased in the last 10 years. We have, a large number of new learners entering the system each year. The allocation to ECD is welcome. But, there's still this big funding gap for grade R. This is supposed to be compulsory, but the funding hasn't been allocated. So these are the kinds of issues that are really concerning. What we're hearing is, that the nutrition program isn't adequately funded. There are still schools who aren't able to provide meals to learners, which in some instances the only meal that they receive in a day. And we know that hungry children can't learn. And so really it's just not enough. We'll be looking at the numbers a little bit more closely, but it doesn't look as though there's a significant increase at all to basic education.
Lisa, in terms of health, we've got the numbers with regards to this. 26 billion Rand for HIV/AIDS programs, 21.3 billion for healthcare staffing and services. A lot of the discussion, of course, was with regards to this NHI bill, which is still on ice. And of course, there's certain legal proceedings that are occurring with regards to that. But what is your take with regards to this? A step in the right direction announced by Treasury, given that from a public health perspective, South Africa is still suffering from those frailties in that regards?
Sure, I think our members would probably be able to give you a slightly better response on health specifically, but we found it quite difficult to sort of trace the funds. It took quite some time for the department to provide an estimate or a number to the impact of the withdrawal of PEPFAR funding. That's, I believe, has been sort of extended for 6 months. There is a special appropriation with some emergency funds, but just from where we're sitting, it's not enough. What we're hearing from the users of the public health system are people standing in queues, clinics without staff, people spending their money to get to clinics only to find that they can't be seen. Or when they are seen, there's no medicine, so they're told to go and buy what they need from the pharmacy. So there really is a huge need for increased funding to the health system, and the uncertainty around the NHI, the PEPFAR withdrawal, and various other factors don't seem to be sort of adequately considered. I don't feel as though we're getting the sort of information that we need to fully understand where the gaps are and what's being done to improve universal health access for all.
I just want to pick your brain on just a few more aspects, Lisa, before we close. I think the biggest story out of this is probably the 20 billion rand withdrawal in planned tax increases. So a lot of the sort of concern was that especially personal tax was going to be reviewed by the Minister and Treasury to go ahead and be something of sort of income revenue for government that has been withdrawn. I mean, just your take on that. Was that a necessary move, a populist move, which was done by the Minister?
I think, for some listeners, the BJC position mightn't be unpopular, because we've been calling for more taxation, specifically focused on wealthy individuals, high earners, people with large portfolios of assets. I don't think we have to, remind ourselves that we are, one of the most unequal countries in the world. We, have a very limited ability to draw more debt, and we know that there just needs to be much more available for spending on these priorities. So, I think the relief, the adjustments in the tax brackets and things, these mostly benefit sort of middle class people and wealthier people. We would really like to see the Minister take on some of our proposals around introducing a wealth tax and increasing taxes on luxury purchases, to sort of mobilize some of this revenue that we need, and to sort of show that the country actually cares about addressing inequality. We can't remain the most unequal country in the world forever. It's not a badge that we can carry.
Lisa, in 30 seconds, a mark out of 10, how would you grade Minister Enoch Godongwana's speech, given what we have listened to and, of course, spoken about so far?
Sure, very difficult, but really less than 5.
Okay.
It's a budget for markets and investors and wealthier people that completely ignores the lived reality of the majority of citizens in this country. And we really had hoped that we would see some sort of shift, and that hasn't happened.
Lisa Higginson, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on this Budget Speech 2026. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much.
That's Lisa Higginson. She's a researcher at the Budget Justice Coalition. So just my take on this, of course, Minister Godongwana mentioned, the removal of from the grey list of FATF, the first credit rating upgrade in 16 years, borrowing costs have increased, the withdrawal of 20 billion rand in planned tax increases. The global growth for this year, according to the IMF, 3.3%. South Africa, potentially, if all goes according to plan, could see 1.6%, up from 1.4% from last year. But a lot of challenges still remain. Weak infrastructure, the current foot and mouth disease. South Africa, big exporter of agriculture, especially cattle and logistics. A lot of work for government, a lot of work for the portfolios that need to sort that. Agriculture, transport, public works. So government's got their work cut out for them if they are to have the realization of this 1.6% GDP growth. Well, that's all we have for you here from today's budget speech. From myself, Faraz Patel, we'd like to thank our technical team. Welcome, Yemi and Suleiman, for making this happen. A special mention to Imtiaz also at FCC. And that's where we bring a close to this budget speech. Do stay tuned to Hilaal TV for the rest of Ramadan as we bring you more content on this blessed month. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.